Hello and welcome back to the NRL Supercoach Talk Draft. Oh, fuck. I almost said waiver wire because it was on me.
You did, because we've already done the preseason one, mate. That's why.
Oh, all right, let me start. What did I say last time? I can't remember now.
Fucking nailed it as well.
Oh, Jesus.
NRL Supercoach Talk preseason podcast.
Okay, we'll go with that.
NRL Supercoach Talk Draft preseason podcast with your boy, Osimo.
We'll just leave that.
You want me to give it a revy intro?
You?
I can fucking fire it up if you want. Stupid voice.
No, we won't worry about it. All right, let's go. Hello and welcome back to the NRL Supercoach Talk Draft preseason podcast. Chris and Simon back again for another year of Supercoach fantasy football. How you going, mate?
Mate, let's get into it. New season coming up. It's been too long. I just share with the listeners, we actually did this recording a few nights ago and the audio didn't work. So we're bloody getting back into it tonight, mate. We're just, we can't wait.
Oh, just so keen for fantasy to start back up that, mate, I'm happy to do it twice. I'm that pumped to talk about draft.
Yeah, well, in fairness, mate, to the listeners, we got a bit off topic a few times as we do. So maybe it'll be a bit shorter this one.
Yeah, no, that is true. They probably get some better content out this time. All right, mate. Well, let's jump straight into some of the rankings and just basic draft talk or how we're going to approach these podcasts. Just the one preseason podcast for us this year. No positional podcast. We're just going to try and talk a bit of draft strategy in this podcast. Go through kind of our projected first round, a few shallow positions to target, and those sorts of things. So just for those real avid strategists, oh, Jesus Christ.
Strategists, mate. Strategists.
Yeah, tacticians. I'm not much of a tactician myself. But for those of you who are out there who don't mind a bit of strategy, we'll try and go through that as best we can.
Do you want to take the listeners through, mate, some of the formatting stuff that we do first, bit of the housekeeping, just to do with the league structure?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one, actually. So, I mean, well, this is our, was it nearly 10th year, I reckon. We're back doing draft well before the Supercoach website came about. We used to do the old pen and paper and manual drafting on Excel, so it's been a few years.
The good old days, mate, pen and paper.
Yeah, so we've been around for a fair while doing this sort of caper. So we kind of have come to settle on 10-man leagues, probably kind of where we think the sweet spot is. Don't do captains, though. Something we don't really...
Stay away from captains, guys. If you can help it in leagues out there, it's a luck factor that we don't enjoy too much. Picking captains, I think draft there's enough because you got standalone players as it is. You really don't need it, and we recommend against it.
Yeah, mate. It's one of those things that we're pretty passionate about in terms of draft. We've seen the game come a long way over the years, and obviously the dream somewhere down the road is to have editable final series for draft because we still do ours manually off site and do a 5-man finals. But I know that all the listeners out there, you're going to be having 8-man leagues with 8 teams making the finals, or 10-man leagues with 8 men making the finals. So we've still got some ways to go, but that's sort of how we run our league, sort of offline. Do the live draft on the whiteboard and then upload the stats on a live draft one computer day or so after the draft. So ours is up this weekend, so we're pretty pumped.
Yeah, positions 1 and 2 for us this year, mate, for the first time. Just let the listeners know as well about, especially those who are new to draft. As commissioner this year, I put together a bit of a plan with the family dog. She really was the one that picked where we chose this year, and we had some random styrofoam cups with treats under them and had live video feed of her running through and sort of turning them over to decide the order. And it was good fun. So try and, you can do, pick random numbers in horse races and, lots of different ways to do it, but it makes it interesting and fun. So Simon and I jumped out with number 1 and 2. So that'll obviously means when we're completing, some of the analysis, we'll bring up some of those positions as well and what our strategies might be specifically. But also we'll cover 1 through 10. And then for bigger leagues of 12 and 16 teams, we will try and sort of cater to that those leagues a bit as well, just with the slight differences in strategy you might employ. But yeah, predominantly, if you can get your 10-team leagues out there without captains, that's the way to go.
Yep, that's it, mate. All right, well, let's jump straight into it. I guess, like you said, with us having the number 1 and number two picks, it's a good place for us to kick off with who should go number 1 overall in drafts. And I'm going to go a little, it's not a huge shock to anyone listening, but it's a little bit off course, I guess, in terms of what the consensus would be at number 1 overall. And I'm actually going to kick it off with one of the big fullbacks, probably Tedesco for me. I think is the number 1 pick, at least in my mind. And the reason for that, for me, is I just get the feel with Tedesco that if everything was to go right for him, Trbojevic, or Tom Trbojevic, that is, and Cook, I just think Tedesco just has that season in him in the club that he plays for that could just be astronomically good. I do envision a slight drop-off in Cook's average, only a little bit. He'll still probably be the best hooker, but I don't know. I guess when you got the first overall pick, you just got to go with whatever your gut is telling you the strongest. And for me, that's Tedesco this year. So that kind of turns over to you at number 2. So leaving you with kind of a Tom Trbojevic, Damien Cook dilemma.
Mate, you've already lost most of the listeners, the experts out there. They've said Damien Cook is the number 1 pick and you shouldn't be looking anywhere else. Well, to them, I say you're wrong. Damien Cook will come back to the pack a bit this year versus Cam Smith and Hodgson. He is absolutely not the first overall pick. I personally wouldn't really be a big fan of taking him anywhere in the top 3, and I would be pretty upset, to be honest, if I was sort of stuck with that decision. Now, in our league, that is going to fall to number 3 because I think you are correct with Tedesco first, followed by Turbo. I think the upside in those two trajectories pointing up, they're the guys you want at the start of your drafts this year. Damien Cook, mate, I just think with the Bennett factor, he did drop off a bit at the back end of last year, just when the South forwards didn't quite have the same punch. I just don't see value there taking him, pardon me, as early as that.
Yeah, look, it's extremely controversial. You know, the guy averaged 78 points per game last year, which is just out of this world good. If he could drop off 10 points per game and still be worthy of a number 1 overall pick, it's just more for the value, I think, how I see both those 2 elite fullbacks over sort of Cook. I know that hooker is one of the shallowest positions, but I guess that's sort of why I just feel like if you own some of those middle tier hookers, the McInneses and the Cullicks and the Coruscaws, guys that sort of have 60 averages in them, it's only the weeks that you come up against Cook that one time a year or 2 times a year that you really are going to feel at that position. I think you're a pretty good chance with guys in that range to match Hodgson and Smith on any given week. So that's sort of just how I'm thinking, because I just feel like both Tedesco and Turbo just have that 170, 180 point upside that Cook doesn't quite have that big a ceiling. He sort of capped out last year. I think his top score was 115. So obviously that's not anything to sneeze at, but it's just not that mega upside that those other 2 possess.
I think, mate, you're just really the one that I want to. Yeah, I guess we'll expand on it as we go on through the round by round analysis. But it's really that middle clump of hookers that you can get somewhere, round 4 plus in competitive leagues that don't, follow trends and draft hookers too early or what have you. You're going to get your Coruscant, McInnes, McCulloch later on, and they're better value. So we'll make sure we come back to that as we move on through the rounds. Number 4, mate, for me, I have a pretty straightforward choice here. We should say Cook. You and I have still conceded that Cook going 3rd is still fine. It's just I wouldn't love to have to make that decision. Yeah,
man. If I was picking 3rd, I'd take Cook. It's just that personally, I'd take the 2 fullbacks over him.
Yeah. I agree. Number 4 for me, I think, is very straightforward in Gerbo. Just in terms of the one forward that stands out there that's got an average that really is very unlikely to go anywhere. He's kind of replaced sort of the the Gallon and that mold that have moved on. Parker and that in recent years. He's not quite the very upper echelon those guys were, but he's going to be a rock solid choice. I've got him as a number 4. How about yourself?
Yeah, I've gone a different direction there. I see all your points about Jake Trbojevic. He's a great fantasy player. He's pretty much a lock to average sort of 70 points per game nearly, which is pretty hard to say about anyone in the history of the game. But for me personally, I'm still a believer in Kalen Ponga. I still think that the upside for him as a goal kicker in a much improved night side and dual position this year, I just can't go past him. It's more to do with Jake Trbojevic being in a position where there's just so much depth, being a second row forward, that I'd much prefer to take that position scarcity with Kalen Ponga in round 1 and then look to come back sort of late round 2 with a potential Sam Burgess or a Nathan Brown or someone like that I think is a really good cut price investment on Trbojevic, where you can then go and obviously up yourself there in the 5/8 of the fullback with an elite player like Ponga. That's just my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think the reason why I've got Gerbo and Tamalolo there is because that's set at sort of irrespective of position. If you get a guy that's going to average you 70, it's kind of that bankable elite guy where, those guys they'll still hit hundreds when they score tries, but they also represent that floor. So I almost just disregard for those two. I pretty much disregard the average, the position scarcity because of that elite status. And because of the remaining guys in round 1 all have question marks as to how that average 70. I think Ponga, I definitely think is the next cab off the rank in that round 1 behind both Gerbo and Tamalolo, but I can't have him ahead of him just because of that unknown. There's the range of outcomes is a lot bigger for Ponga.
Yeah, see, that's where I think we might disagree again slightly. I'm going to be taking a halfback over Jason Tamalolo this year.
Okay.
And for me, I've got Sean Johnson ranked as my number 1 halfback, but it is very close between him and Cleary. I'm a pretty firm believer that if I've got to pick sort of middle of the packs through like 5, sorry, not 5, but maybe 6, 7, and 8, I'm targeting Sean Johnson and Nathan Cleary in those spots to try and fill a weak position there before I attack Jason Tamalolo, who I sort of have as kind of like a back-end first-round pick, like an 8, 9, 10 type of range for him.
Yeah, I think picking Sean Johnson over – I've got Sean Johnson as my 3rd-ranked halfback. Regular listeners to our podcast will know that the injury risk is just too high to invest a round 1 pick in Johnson. And he's kind of proved that right pretty much every season he's played, really. I know he had one big year where he stayed up most of the season, but I can't invest a round 1 there when I could have a bankable guy like Gerbo or Tamalolo. And I would also take Cleary to potentially, I think he'll average more than Sean Johnson this year, just standing alone. So I would be picking, I'm happy with Ponga followed by Cleary after the 2 elite 2RFs. And I have Sean Johnson not in the first round.
Okay, so just to summarise the first round for you then, so it's Teddy, Turbo, Cook, Jake Trbojevic, Kalen Ponga.
Tamalolo goes in there.
Sorry, Tamalolo above Ponga for you then.
Yep, Tamalolo above Ponga. Then Ponga. Then I'd have Cleary. And what number are we up to there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7th.
7th, yeah. Then I think we'll touch on the next ones coming up now. So I definitely think Fafita is a very firmly belongs there. Down in 8, I really like Fafita's pick, mate. We're both believers in that sort of position scarcity at the top end of the front row. Fafita, he's the big dog this year with Gallon obviously getting towards the end. No Luke Lewis anymore. That forward rotation, that's his to get big minutes. All he has to do to average 70 plus is not start as slowly as he has done the last 3 or 4 seasons, which is quite conceivable. He looked pretty decent the other night. I think he could be in for a big season, Andrew Fafita.
I 100% agree with Andrew Fafita having a big season. Averaged 68 points per game last year, and I think he can definitely improve on that average this year with more minutes as Gal starts to fade away. and also the retirement of Luke Lewis and the injury to Wade Graham. So he's really going to stand up as a leader in that side. And I guess it begs the question that I sort of was thinking as you're saying that there, like Andrew Fafita being a staple at the top of the front row rankings with upside that you just don't see too many front rowers have. Talk to me about Fafita versus Taumalolo, because Taumalolo averaged 70 last year, Fafita 68. Position scarcity, is that still that 2 points per game average going to lead you still towards Lolo?
It's close. It definitely is close. I think I'd still, if backed into a corner, I still think I'd have Taumalolo to average more. But you do make a valid point about moving Fifi ahead of Taumalolo in terms of forwards. Fifi has let us down in the past and has found his way to an injury as well. I got to give Taumalolo the nod there, but I like your theory. And I think what you're speaking to is if you're getting Andrew Fafita towards the back end of round one, I love it. I think that is such a good strategy to go with if you can get him. Yeah,
I really like Fafita back there for all the reasons we've mentioned about the scarce front row depth. Well, just the difference he is over kind of like even the 5th and 6th ranked front rowers, or even the 4th ranked front rowers.
Well, even you get to the bottom around, the bottom of the top 10, and you're starting to look at like your Alvaros and your SESs and Tolmans and these types. The difference he could potentially have over them is massive. So he'd be an absolute target for me. Anywhere from 7 down in round one, I think you're getting great value on Fafita down there.
Yeah, I agree. So that kind of gets us down to 8th. So 8th, I've got SJ already picked. So after Fafita towards the back end of round one, who are you looking at back there?
You can start to look at, I think Cam comes back into the equation for mine. I think potentially last year he still snuck his way to a 64 average with, the first season he's finally, actually got injured. He's just re-signed this deal. Storm aren't going anywhere. That's still a good side. I think there's a shot for Cam Smith to really close the gap to Damien Cook this year, personally. And I actually like the value of Cam Smith in the back end of one.
Yeah, I agree. I think as much as Smith is going to be kind of viewed as a bit more of a boring pick these days, I still think he's really warranted a pick at the back end of the first round. And me personally, if I was picking kind of 9th or 10th, especially if you're picking 9th, I'd be taking Smith round one and just sort of settling for whichever of the second row forwards come back to me in round two, if that's the way I was going to go. If you're a big believer in Crichton and Arrow and maybe like Marty Tapau, these sorts of guys, I really just think that you're better off just taking Smith first, locking up that scarce position, and then just settling for which of those guys come back to you. Because if you take them early, let's say you take Crichton at 9, there's a much better chance that Smith will be gone, and then you'll be sort of backed into a corner where you can't really double up again on a forward, because if you go forward, it's a bit difficult. So you kind of...
Mate, just to jump in there, we want to make sure we emphasise, don't go forward, guys. I mean, you could go for in draft leagues, it's upside players that, in more scarce positions generally win these things. Simon and I, as you know, have been playing for quite some time now, and it just doesn't work. So if you take 2 2RFs to start this draft, I don't like your chances.
What about if there was second row, front row start?
I still don't like it, mate. There's too many upside guys here that you probably need to sort out. So, pardon me, I'd rather even for me, I'd rather grab a Sean Johnson or a Cherry Evans or, dare I say, we already mentioned Cam Smith, obviously, Milford or Munster or Widdop, even if you're a firm believer in him at fullback. I think you got more of a chance of, if you nail the Widdop pick, for example, and, he's as good as he could be, that's going to be better in the long run than picking another 2RF that you could easily grab a decent one further down the list and later in the draft. Yeah,
I agree, mate. So let's kind of talk to that second round, that early to mid-second round, and then because I think there's some really interesting names through there that you just sort of touched on. So we've got Angus Crichton, Marty Tapau, Jai Arrow, Daly Cherry Evans. and then you've got your Cameron Munsters, Gareth Widdups, and Anthony Milfords. So that's quite a few names. We've probably pushed that out to sort of a back end of round 2. What do you think about those names? Who are you high on? Anyone you think doesn't belong? And then there's also the big name of Supercoach gun in the past, Sam Burgess. What do you make of him as well?
Okay, well, I sort of break it down like this. Depending on what you did in round 1 really dictates where you go in round 2. So I feel like someone like the Fafita owner is in a great position to grab whoever you believe in the most out of those halves. So if you're a DCE or Sean Johnson, Munster, Milford, or even a Widdup believer, great position to grab one of those guys because you're attacking a more scarce position like 5'8" or fullback, but you've got the rock solid guy in the front row as well. So again, love the. It's pretty unlikely I'm going to dislike the team that owns Fafita in draft leagues this year.
Provided that they take a 5'8" or a full.
Provided they do. If they go back and get another forward, I'm not on board, obviously. The Taumalolo and Trebojevic owner, very important they jump on one of those upside halves or fullbacks as well. That's a pretty straightforward one. The Damien Cook owner is in a very interesting position. I'm not sure how I'd go if I took Cook, say, anywhere even in the top 3. Where would you go?
Well, the problem is, and I guess this is the only downside to picking at the start of a draft, is that you're just going to have to accept the fact that you're going to be weaker at halfback than most of the teams, because you're not in a position at the start of the draft to be, because SJ's gone, Cleary's gone, and DCE's gone.
The clear top 3. Even though I'm not a Sean Johnson fan, I do believe he firmly belongs in that category, of course.
So it's Ben Hunt is kind of the not consensus number 4 halfback, but for the majority of people, he's sort of in there and thereabouts with sort of your Adam Reynolds, Michael Morgan sort of fighting for that spot. So a couple of people like Mitchell Pearce. It doesn't matter how high you are on really any of those guys. You're still reaching for them massively if you're taking them at the start of round 2 or back of round 2, start of round 3. So you're not taking halfback there. There's a good chance they won't even, because you're not taking them there, they might not get back to you at the 4-5 swing. So you've pretty much just come to an acceptance that, right, halfback, I'm just going to have to make do less with some of these guys that I can get further down. You've got the elite hooker in the comp. I really think that that forwards, you're going to be pretty happy with what value comes back to you in the 3rd round. I think if you've got Cook, in round 2 there, you're really hoping you can get yourself one of those 5'8s, the dual, probably like a Munster or a Widdup, to fall to you, or you're looking at guys like Milford and Cody Walker in that 2nd round, personally.
Yeah, I think so. I think I still want to grab one of those more upside halves, keep it going that way, but then make sure you're locking up one of the best forwards available in round 3. I agree with that. So obviously we believe Teddy and Turbo will go in the top 3 of most drafts this year. I think I really like where you're at there. You really can go in a lot of different directions there. Again, if any of the Munster, Milford, Widdup levels sneak their way through, I think they're a good selection there as well. How early is too early for Cody Walker?
Yeah, he's a really interesting player, Cody Walker, because he's sort of, at least in our leagues anyway, he's always gone within the first 3 picks of round 3 in the last couple of years. It's like just where he settles in.
Yeah.
I really don't hate anyone who's going to take Cody Walker kind of probably not the middle of 2, but sort of the back end of 2 and the start of 3. I've got no issue with him there, because some people are going to be ranking Cody Walker above Milford, and it's really not that hard of an argument to really make. Like, I'd take Milford personally, but Cody Walker's out-averaged Milford at least last year. So I really don't see how you can definitively say that there's a huge difference between the 2 of those. So if you're willing to take him at the back of 2, I wouldn't hate you for it.
Yeah, I think it's for those sort of pick the back end of round 2. I fully agree the strategy of hanging on and waiting for a forward in round 3, because it really is. We still haven't mentioned, Papali is going to be sitting there, Ryan James, who you and I don't. We're not massive Ryan James fans, but he's still a very solid option. Kickout's still there. Nathan Brown. I think Marty Tapau will be long gone by that time. I believe Marty belongs somewhere at the start of 2, just because of he's now dual eligible, and I don't know, mate. Do you think he's got potential to average more than 65 to Powell, or do you think that's about where he tops out?
Look, I do think he can average more than 65 because he hasn't scored many tries, at least last year, and I think he has got more of a try-scoring season in him, even if it's only kind of – he's a front row, so he's not going to ever score heaps of tries, but if he sort of ups it and scores maybe 4 or 5 tries in a year, I think he can average 70. It is in him. The thing that really stands out for me that could be a real thing for the Marty Tapau owners is if you take Marty Tapau at the start of round 2, if Sam Burgess then goes and just falls a really long way and sort of is there start of round 3 for the person who's picked early, I think if you're getting Sam Burgess 10 plus or possibly 10 picks away from Tapau, given the fact that they're both duals in the front row, I think the person who's picking early is really happy in that scenario that they're going to back Burgess to kind of match Tapau, and obviously take the value, the fact that you've just picked a person way earlier in the back end of 2.
Well, I don't mind it. I get where you're going with that, but I think another person that we need to really start considering here is, really a guy who's for me is the elite back in the competition is Latrell Mitchell, both from a real life and Supercoach perspective. I mean, the guy is a freak, and it's just looking forward to seeing what he has to offer this year again. So we better touch on, mate, the fact that historically taking centre wings too early has pretty much never worked. Whether it be Mansour after his breakout season, Rapin has even let us down, Croker's let us down when taken early. You're really looking all the way back to Jamie Lyon, who was a bit of a stalwart as a goal-kicking CTW in that very good Manly side. But even he ended up sort of fading when taken early, towards the back end. So we usually advise against it, but Latrell Mitchell puts together, for me anyway, like about as compelling a case as you could ever see. Playing in an elite side, he's the goal kicker. He is an upcoming real-life gun. The work rate started to improve at the back end of last year. All signs point towards a 60-plus average locked in, which, as you know, in the CTW is hard to come by. Could you make a case for him in mid to back of round 2?
Well, I think you just did. There is so much to like about Latrell because, he's still got room to improve in real life and then will translate to fantasy, just because if he was just to up his base even slightly and do what he does, he could be anything. But even though, with that being said, it's still not something that I would really be advising, because I feel like you've got to take him in round 2 to get him. And you need him to be that big difference maker over the other centre wingers for it to really pay off, I feel.
Well, that's because centre wing was so poor last year, as you know. It was the averages appeared to be down just across the board. Very few average 60-plus. So it's one of those things. If the overall standard of CTWs comes back up again, he's not going to be that much better to warrant picking him over, your Surgises and any of those, upside 5/8s. Where I do kind of can get on board, I guess, with the start of 3 potentially if he's still there. Just if you've locked up, say you've got your Cook and you've managed to somehow grab one of those upside 5/8s, maybe he's a bit of a luxury pick that will win you some weeks, because he's a guy, he'll score hundreds. We know this. I can make an argument for it as a luxury pick, but as you've said, mate, you've got to get it right. Yeah, he has to be as good as he was last year.
Yeah, the thing is, so to take Latrell where we're saying he could potentially go, that means he's going to the Cook, Tedesco, or Tom Travojevic owner. So you've got either a hooker and now a centre wing, or you've got a fullback only and a centre wing. The decision there is what goes with that other pick. Does it have to be a 5/8 or well, it's probably not going to be a halfback because Cherry Evans is not going to slip that far, I wouldn't imagine. Does it have to be a 5'8", or should you really be trying to lock up at least one elite / very near elite forward?
You'd think it's the forward there. I could see, geez, if one of those Munster, Milford, Widdop, or even Walker, as you mentioned, probably belongs very close to that argument. If you went that level, I guess you're just committing to a lesser halfback, but you had to do that anyway. You could sort of bank on the fact that 2RF is pretty deep. So you could just really focus on those positions in the sort of rounds 4 and 5 and just really forego halfback as late as possible. It could work. It's definitely a strategy I think would be very interesting to see play out. So say for yourself, say you went, say, Turbo, Latrell, let's say Walker or Milford, one of those two, whichever one you prefer. That is a side that I think would be very interesting. There's obviously upside just exploding there. And then just really hope to come down and grab 2 solid forwards in 4 and 5.
Well, you must really love it because you just told me that I'm drafting Turbo when we know that's you. So you've kind of just had a crack and told us what your team's going to be. You've felt a bit.
I'd love to, mate. I'm excited about it. But that's definitely not for the risk averse, that one. I think the safer option probably is, grabbing a Surgis or one of those guys, Nathan Brown or Kickout. Be hard to pass on any of those 3, I think.
I'll tell you what I like about it, though, and I'll tell you why it's a bona fide strategy this year, more so than most years gone by. And that is the fact of just how deep second row forward is. It is just the deepest I can ever remember it being. I'm looking at my rankings here, and some of these second rowers who are ranked outside the top 30, so a 10-man league, as you know, you only start 3 of these guys. I know there's a couple of duels thrown in, so you can sort of push it out to kind of a top 35-ish. But, I've got Matt Eisenhuth ranked as my 35th ranked second row forward. Josh Maguire is there and thereabouts as well at 30. Where's Josh Maguire? At 34. These guys, Joe Stimson, Isaiah Yeo, Kurt Capewell, Sean Lane, Isaiah Papali, Tarek Sims, all of these guys have got legit roles in their current team. So, and I'm talking about they're the guys who we're viewing as 2RF3s in teams if drafts are going to play out the way of my rankings are. I think there's really not that panic button on getting a second row forward like there has been in the past. I think if you were to take that elite CTW in Latrell Mitchell, there's definitely going to be value second row forwards later on. I think you can get 2 RFs that are ranked in between 20th and 30th overall, and you'd be pretty happy with that if that's how it fell.
Yeah, I think the only thing about doing that strategy is you are really sort of almost locking yourself into those 2 forward picks in 4 and 5. So if there is any value in other positions, it does make it that little bit harder to jump on it. So if a guy falls, that's the only thing I don't like. I try and avoid strategies like that limit my options during a draft because I think you couldn't. Would you agree? You probably couldn't push it any further than that, though. In terms of, if you only grab 1 forward in 4 and 5, for example, you are pretty much committing to a pretty weak forward pack from that point.
Yeah, but that's my reasoning, though, Rhett, is that I don't think the forward pack is going to be that weak when you've got these guys filling these holes in your – we call it holes in your side, but it's not really a hole because they're good starters and they can do a job for you in your second row.
Well, you're going to have to grab, because you're going to have 1 forward by the end of round 5. So 6 and 7, I think you'd be surprised how many of those 2RFs can be off the board just by virtue of their averages last year.
Yeah, you probably are right. But how many of these guys are going to, like I said, we're talking about literally the end of the second row rankings for a 10-man league. We're talking about outside the top 30.
Yeah.
How many of them are going to get doubled up on where people are taking them as bench players before, like they can't take them as bench players when you're looking at them?
No, but they can still round out. So, 10, you're saying, so 10 of 10 teams, 3 per, with the duels that are included there as well. So you can, you really should be drafting to Power, Surges, Papali, James, Tavita, Clemmer, Lane. Those ones, immediately you should be playing them as a front rower, I would suggest.
So there's only 7. Sorry,
Yeah, 7.
8. Sorry, 8 if you include Manu Ma'u.
Yeah, 8 of roughly the top 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 25. And yeah, I catch your drift here. I like where you're going with it. I just think you might want to be careful just how far you push that theory. That's all.
Okay.
You want to be the guy that is sort of just scumming together 50 average 2RFs.
Yeah, like I'll just give you a potential team, right? So let's say you've got Tom Travojevic, Anthony Milford, Latrell Mitchell.
Yep.
And then you come back, you want to take a forward in your next round. Let's say you take, you could take Cordner or Matt Gillette, maybe Paul Gallen in the 4th round. I think it'll still be thereabouts.
I don't think Gallen goes that far, but I think Gallen he'll be gone sort of turn 3, round 4. I would imagine in most leagues.
Okay, well let's say you take Gillette.
Gillette, yeah.
In the 4th. Let's say you don't take a second rower in the 5th. You go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
You can come back in the 6th and 7th and take guys like Frizzell or Fatala Mariner, Tarek Sims.
Yeah, I think the Clemmer, Lane, Fatala, that sort of level, I think they're all gone by 6th.
Not Clemmer. Clemmer's long gone, but Fatala Mariner and Frizzell, I think, are kind of 6th-round picks.
Okay. Look, it's interesting. It could work. It just could also, if you got a bad run of those 2RFs going, it could be one of those things where you push the theory a bit far. But we'll see.
Then you've got the elite CTW as well.
Yeah, it also means you won't have. It'd take a while to be able to start like firming up the next CTW because you got to focus on the forward so much. So I think you and I both are believers in terms of strategy for CTW. It's good to have that bona fide number 1 who's got that 100 game in him. There aren't heaps of those in the league. We've sort of learned over the last couple of years. Yes, there are the fluky try-scoring days, but we're talking about the genuine threats to score 90-plus from the CTW. They're few and far between, mate, to be honest, aren't they?
Yeah, they're very difficult. One of the hardest things I found this year was finding a consensus number 3rd ranked CTW. I think everyone I've sort of heard and on Twitter and everyone's rankings I've seen, that after Latrell and Masters, that number 3 has been all sorts of different names through there. I've seen some people put Mansour as a huge bounce back up there. I've seen Croker, obviously. I've seen Manu Ma'u with his great average last year. Blake Ferguson with the season he had now that he's changed clubs. Some people happy enough to still have him up there. Wonga Blake has got hype. There's some crazy. Sorry, I shouldn't say crazy because there's how can it be crazy when there's so much conjecture? But I just think finding whoever that 3rd ranked CTW is, there's a lot going on there that could really change a lot of drafts.
I agree. I'll stick with my boy Croker, but God knows how early you'd need to draft him. I think it sort of brings us to that next CTW. We've got a consensus 1 and 2 this year, with obviously S and Masters coming in at number 2. He's more of the rock solid version of the CTW that'll average about 60. Obviously with that goal kicking, very, very solid, very good real life player. Yeah. He's a guy I can't find a price that I think I'd get into Esan Masters. He'll go earlier than I'd be prepared to pay.
Well, where do you think he goes? Back end of 3?
No, I think he'll start to look interesting at the beginning of 3. So I think the range of outcomes in leagues, it'll be the start of 3, anywhere to the end of, or maybe the start of 4 in some leagues. But for me, mate, I guess if I was picking, if he was still there at the back end of 3 and I already had, or I had my fullback or I had my 5'8" or halfback covered, I guess I could have a crack there. But I don't know, mate. He doesn't represent the big, match winning upside guy that I tend to go for in the CT dub. So I'd rather look elsewhere.
Yeah, me too. I do like Masters for his consistency, but exactly what you just said. He hasn't shown that he has that 100-point game in him. He's a consistent player, and that's that's why you're attracted to him, but probably not worth a third-round pick if he hasn't got matchup winning upside. I don't think is probably my take on that.
Yeah, start of 4, I change my tune. I think if I'm, again, if I've got a couple of those other more scarce positions covered, he's a bit of a luxury pick at the start of 4 that I really like the look of.
Yeah. Round four, obviously. It's pretty hard to see it happening. Just gonna, oh mate, looking at his stats here, though, I probably am being a bit harsh on the Isan Masters. He scored 200s last year, an 89 and a 90. 91. So it's 4 games of 89 plus. Probably been a little bit harsh.
Probably, mate. I don't know. I'm going to go with it. I'm sticking with it. That I guess I'm saying he's acceptable value anywhere from mid-round 3. I guess he's not that different to Latrell in terms of the overall output at the end of the year, but I definitely think I'd rather Latrell. And I don't know about the Tigers, mate. I know they were okay and competitive last year, but I just feel like they're a team that I'm still not that excited to have a part of.
Yeah, that is a great point. That's obviously the big difference between Latrell Mitchell and Isan Masters. Is just the potential for goals from Latrell Mitchell, and just tries that are just gifted to him as well. He'll score so many more tries than Masters in that side. So fair play. All right, so some other guys that we can talk about here that I think are well worth a mention that we should have spent a bit more time on. Gareth Widdop and Reece Martin, I think, are really interesting names at the top end of the draft, sort of round 2 plus. I'll kick it off first with Widdop and then sort of ease on into Reece Martin. So what do you reckon about those guys?
Mate, I'm going to say something that I think we did briefly touch on Widdop. I think you and I, as we've sort of went on a bit earlier, we did this podcast the other day, and my opinion didn't change more for any player than Gareth Widdop. The more I thought about it, goal kicking in that St George side, that forward pack on the front foot, I think Corey Norman's a great signing for them just to steer him around. Not really a ball runner as such these days. He's more just sets people up and keeps it ticking. I think the ceiling is quite high on Gareth Widdop this year. I'm excited about it, and I think as early as the start of round 2, there's an argument he's ahead of Milford, Munster, Johnson, Cherry Evans if it all ticks. I think his ceiling is that high. He's not as safe as those other guys in terms of, he hasn't played fullback consistently since back at the Storm, which he did, and he looked good. And, of course, I believe he is leaving at the end of the year. There's all those, complications. But if you're a believer in Widdop, I think as early as round 2 is fine. And I think if you are picking him up in round 3, I think he's an automatic selection.
Yeah, I agree, because especially the thing with Widdop, it's exactly the same duel as Ponga, but we know he's going to be playing fullback now. If things stay as they are, and you give me a season of Ponga at 5'8" versus Widdop at fullback, you're very happy to take Widdop with the discount. Is all I'll say there. And I'm a Ponga believer, even at 5'8", but it's more of a testament to how good I think Widdop could be in that position, more so than it is against Ponga. So
he's a sneaky one, mate. I think there'll be leagues out there he'll get slept on Widdop because they didn't finish great, and he in particular, even his goal kicking was a bit shaky back end of last year. He's a guy, if you could get him in round 3, he's a great pickup for those who draft Cook early. I'd love to pair him with Widdop at the end of 2, start of 3. Great pickup. Yeah,
really good get, I think, yeah. Okay, and Reece Martin. So I guess I'll sort of kick off with I think of Reece Martin, and that is that I'm really not likely to be in a position where I feel like I'd want to take the risk on him. I think I just why take the punt on him when you've got these guys around him who, yes, if everything falls right for Martin, they probably don't have the exact same ceiling as he does with the goal kicking, but I'm talking of guys like Sam Burgess, Nathan Brown, Fitzgibbon, Kikau, probably not Papali. Oh, yeah, Papali, I guess, is sort of in there too. I just don't see any reason to risk Reece Martin when you've got guys like that staring you in the face at the back end of 2 and the start of round 3. For me to really consider Reece Martin, I think all of those guys have got to be gone. And that probably means that he's going to be a mid-round 3 pick for me, where I'd where there I can sort of get on board with it. But he's not someone I'm looking at as someone who is picking at the back end of 2 and the start of 3.
You want safer picks at the start of drafts. There'll be leagues out there where people just purely go by last season's average. And knowing our luck, mate, we'll overanalyze this and he'll end up being, God 2.0. It's one of those. It almost looks like it will be, but he shouldn't be a guy you're targeting because you've got Kerrod Holland there. There's talk that he may not even be starting in that side. Harawira Naira is there as well, I believe. It's a risky pick. Where you said about where you'd start to be comfortable with it, I'm sort of similar to SN Masters. I mean, if I'm on the turn back in round 4 and he's still sitting there, and especially if I haven't got a 2RF yet, I'm probably okay with it. But just be aware it could blow up spectacularly.
Yeah, if he wins, if someone takes him in round 2 and he ends up winning them the league, then fair play to him, mate. Like if they do that, you just got to applaud that if that's what they pull off. Fair play. You're a better man than I.
Yeah, I agree. The one that the other 2 names, man, the 2RF, we just better quickly touch on is I'm not the biggest Angus Crichton guy this year. I feel he was a bit overs last year. I just feel like coming to the Roosters, it's probably a bit more split, and it might take a little time to gel with Cronk. But he's a guy that I don't know. It might just be more of a personal thing, and I guess the ceiling is still a 70 average. You're pretty high on him, I believe.
I wouldn't say high on him. I just sort of think he's going to be what he is. I think Crichton's just I just don't see how he goes backwards from where he was last year. And if he stays where he was last year, that's where he deserves to be drafted. So yeah. I'm kind of content with him, I guess. He's not someone I'm worried about.
Okay, and Jai Arrow and his, in my opinion, injury-prone ways, what do you think there?
Yeah, I was hoping you weren't going to bring up Arrow because long-term listeners who listened last year would know my thoughts on how much I frothed Arrow last year. And as an owner of him, now that the dust has settled on the season and I lived and breathed every injury and rib knock and all sorts of back spasms and random crap that he had, I lived through all of that, but I also lived to see his base of 50 points in the half that one game. I don't really know what to think of Arrow this year. I understand all the hype on him because if he does play 60 to 65 minutes, he's going to be bloody good.
So that's the ceiling on his minutes in that rotation?
Yeah. Like I'd say his ceiling minutes is like 62, 63 a game.
So he's no shot of an 80-minute guy ever. That's not a thing.
Well, I wouldn't say ever, but just with their current team, Proctor's going to get 80. James gets pretty big minutes, especially if James is on the edge. There's 2 80-minute second rowers.
Yeah.
I don't see how they can have an 80-minute lock there too. I really do think he's sort of going to have that 60 to 65-ish. But, there were games last year where he's only getting sort of 50 to 55 as well. He'd play the first 30 minutes and then go off and sort of come back with 25 to go. Or even sometimes it was less than that. So
I've got him pretty low down, to be honest, man. I'm probably a bit down on Arrow compared to most. I'd have him well down below Kickow and Brown sort of level for mine. I just think the injury risk with those minutes you're talking about, I can fade Arrow pretty easily.
Yeah, look, I'll run through his minutes towards the end of last year. So he played one 80-minute game, but that was back in round 11. From then he went 60, 53, 60, 66, 46, 41, 73, 49, 45, 49, 47 to finish the year. But you need to remember there were some injury-affected games in there, plus he did play Origin for the first time. So there was a good chance he was getting sort of rested in those last 4 games where he got 45, 47 and 49 twice, probably because the Titans were out of it and just there was no reason to risk him. But, yeah, I do think you are extremely low on Arrow if that's where you've got him back with Brown and Kickow, Fitzgibbon type guys.
It's one of those ones, mate. I mean, I could rank him higher than those guys, but I just know he's one that I'll be passing over. If I was to do 1,000 drafts, I doubt I'd ever own him. I could always find someone I think is better value So he's one I'm saying, yeah, try and avoid if you can. I can't make a case there to get excited about Jai Arrow. That being said, he's one of those guys. If he does put together that injury-free season, then I can start to maybe change it a bit. But these niggly injury type guys, it tends to linger. It really does.
All I'll say, if he's fully fit and he gets 60 points, if he gets 60 minutes a game,
yeah,
he'll average near on 75. Like his point per minute is just so good. He's got so much going for him, just in pure base. But it's whether or not he gets that 60 to 65 minutes or not is the thing.
Yep, fair enough.
Okay, so moving down the draft board then, so we're kind of into the middle of round 3 now. So guys we sort of haven't touched on yet were Ryan James, Josh Papali, and then you've got sort of David Clemmer and the sort of really hyped guy of the preseason, TPJ, to throw in there. I think those guys in there are going to probably all be 3rd round picks.
Not Clemmer. Clemmer doesn't have to be that early, and too rich for my blood on TPJ as well.
What about Papali? Where do you view him then?
Yeah, perfect spot for Papali and Ryan James to go. So just to playing him, select them as front rowers. For anyone who hasn't already got a front rower, they're very good value picks there for me, especially Papali.
So TPJ then. So what's the difference between TPJ and Papali to you?
Just not uncertainty around that Broncos rotation. There's a little bit of inbuilt risk there. In his minutes, is he used more as an impactful sort of 50-minute guy? Sure, he'll have a PPM, but it just sort of limits it a little bit for me. If he's a guy that I feel will just each year on year I'll start to build confidence in because he's clearly an up-and-coming gun, but I wouldn't know the certainty of his minutes just yet.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, 50 to 55 minutes seems kind of his ceiling, I guess. I think he'll probably get 50, but it's hard to see him getting more than 55. But anyway, it's a tough one.
I can't get excited about that as a round 3 pick over, even though yes, that is a front row position, over guys like Kikau and Brown, who obviously are pretty much locked into 70-minute plus roles that have upside. In terms of offloads, Brown has that weird tackle upside that you and I have spoken about before, where he can hit 40 points in base alone with his work rate from tackling, and that they're 2 guys I think I'd prefer over TPJ.
Yeah, no, it's fair play. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. Papali's a little bit of a worry. I do worry a bit about Papali, and same as Ryan James. Like Ryan, I guess both for different reasons. James is just the lack of attack, but he'll play big minutes if he's playing second row, whereas Papali's going to be flipped, where he's gone the opposite and is going to be playing front row, where his minutes might get cut. So I don't know. They're weird guys because they've had moving parts in the off season, but I think that's probably why you're going to be getting them where you're getting them in round 3.
Yep.
So Roger Tuivasa-Sheck then, RTS, is he someone that you view as a 3rd rounder?
Definitely. I think it's his show now. With Sean Johnson gone, he is the future of that club, and any success they might try and get. I think there's a chance he returns to that high work rate that we saw back when he was at the Roosters. Hopefully, a year removed from some injuries there. I like the idea of Roger to average 60 plus this year.
Yeah, it's not something I'm mega keen on. As much as you're not a huge fan of TPJ in round 3, I'm not a huge fan of RTS in round 3. I just don't see attacking upside in Roger this year. He might base pretty well because that's sort of his go, but I think the Warriors are going to be a dumpster fire. I just think they're going to be terrible.
Oh, tell us what you really feel.
Well, if they are crap, then it's going to impact RTS for sure. So
yeah, it does. It certainly does. It does limit the upside a bit. You don't think just the natural talent, the fact we just get that many opportunities, even in garbage time, and I do believe there will be garbage time.
Yeah, you're right. There will be garbage time there. I took him in round 3 last year. He won the Dally M, and I still didn't really love the pick in hindsight. If you told me last year that when I took him that he was going to win the Dally M, I would have thought this time right now I'd be saying, oh, he must be he must be getting taken in the top 5 overall picks. But here we are, still talking about him as a 3rd rounder. I just don't. He's an early 4th round guy for mine. I don't see a huge difference between him and a guy like Dylan Edwards, personally.
Yeah, I think probably I'm going to throw in here maybe a slight overreaction just in general, not just yourself, but just in general about Sean Johnson leaving the Warriors. You got to sort of take into account there that Sean Johnson was injured a lot of the time anyway. And yeah, he had his big games, but he went missing just as many times as he was a superstar. And I just think that that's just by nature of being the fulcrum of that team. Like, there's as much chance that he scores the same sort of level of tries he did anyway. That's kind of how I view it, except with the higher work rate.
Yeah. Yes, time will tell, mate. It's not something I'm willing to go, but I guess it's something for someone else in at least our league to worry about. Okay, so let's sort of look back through sort of towards the end of round 3. I think this is where guys like a really interesting guy we haven't mentioned, who definitely probably would have been gone by now. If he hasn't, then he's definitely coming up, and that's Josh Hodgson. Where does he fit into the 3rd round?
Yeah, certainly you can start looking at him at the start of round 3. So the gentleman with, who hasn't taken Cook in the first few picks, he can start to be looked at there. I do like his value versus Smith, and especially against Cook, because I'm not convinced the difference between Hodgson and Cook will actually be all that big. You might be looking at something like 5 points. And I really think that, Hodgson he's in a tier on his own this year almost. Anywhere from the start of round 3 becomes pretty good value. It's just really how much you believe in those guys like Coruscant, McGuinness, and McCulloch in the next tier, and whether you can make sure you get hold of them in round 4 or 5.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like Cook and Smith sort of round 1 guys, then another round's gap for Hodgson. Do you think it's like another round gap between McInnes and McCulloch, or a bit further?
Yeah, about there. I mean, the only risk with not grabbing Hodgson at the start of round 3 would be that you're a chance of missing Coruscant, McInnes, and McCulloch if there's a big run on them in the middle of round 4. He also might get someone who's a believer in any one of those particular guys. I have them ranked Coruscant, McInnes, and McCulloch just because I think Coruscant's a gun. I loved him. The first time I saw him play, I was like, this guy, the super coach, he's what you want. He's busy. He's got attacking stuff in him, plus the base. Now, Finu was there and was great last year. Yes, Finu will probably start on the bench in round 1, but I can't believe Des will want to limit Coruscant's game time once he's up and about.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think if you get Coruscant right, you're in a really good position. It's just such a risky pick.
It is. That's why you love him sort of back of 4. It does probably strengthen the Hodgson pick in 3 because there are question marks on, Coruscant. McGuinness, he's faded now a couple of times at the back end with the rest of the Dragons. McInnes represents a very interesting one for me, just in, if you believe the Dragons might not fade this year, which I'm going to come out and say I don't. I think this Norman addition will help them not do that this year. Now, you may think I'm the biggest Norman fan. I'm not. I just think he works for how that team plays. I think they might keep it together this year if they can keep those forwards fit. So McInnes is a real. I'd love to grab McGuinness in round 4. I also think McCulloch could be better this year with Seabold there. I've got a big feeling about that one too.
Yeah, I see the McCulloch hype. I still don't see McCulloch being as good as McInnes, even with an improvement. I feel really good about McInnes, and I think for me at least, he's a solid number 4 ranked hooker. And McCulloch is pretty much a solid number 5. I didn't have to think too much about those guys. McCulloch and McInnes, very similar players. I would take McInnes over McCulloch for sure, but you're pretty happy with both of those guys locked in as your hooker. I think anytime late round 4, start round 5, that's where you can start to target them.
That's really our strategy, Simon. Like we'll share the round 1 and 2. The reason why Cook is an easier pass for us is you'll notice, guys, we're sort of talking that we will potentially the early picks in round 3 will have first crack at Hodgson, and then in round 4 and 5 there should at least be 1 or 2 of these Coruscant, McGuinness, or McCulloch guys, all of which are clear. They're going to keep you in good stead against at least pretty much half the league. it's just a better strategy to fill up on other more upside positions, in our opinion.
Yeah, yeah, it's just something that we've kind of always done, unless we've had Kevin Smith in the past. But if we haven't had Smith or Cook early, we've always waited for these guys. And I feel much more confident about these guys in the middle rounds now than I have in other years. So that's why I'm happy to wait for that value there. So looking at some other guys of interest in this sort of range, we're getting to the round 4 type of guys now. We're talking guys like Clemmer. I think Ben Hunt starts to creep into calculations here, or whoever you've got ranked sort of in there, whether it's Michael Morgan or Pearce. Matty Moylan. I think your centre wingers like Croker start to sneak in this sort of Nofaluma type range, possibly. Cohen Hess, Gillett. You said Gallen. You think Gallen might go in there? Tarpany.
Gallen sort of start. I think he won't go much lower than around 4 still. He does start to become pretty decent value there. He still averaged 58 with about a 60-minute average. He's not done, and he's a very, like, if you've waited on forwards, he's still a pretty decent option.
Would you be happy enough to wait and have him as your 2RF1?
Look, yes, if I've absolutely stacked the upside, if I've hit a fullback, 5/8, and halfback, or any of those combos, or I've got my Fafita and say Widdop combo, then yeah, I could probably make an argument for that. But that's to say, you and I aren't huge Gallen fans, but in terms of just the injury risk that he presents, but yeah, he's a fine option in round 4.
Well, you'd love to get him if you were doing your Latrell Mitchell strategy we spoke about earlier.
Yeah. That would be a very fine spot to put him in, actually.
Yeah, that's interesting. Matty Moylan and Connor Watson. I suppose I'll throw Michael Morgan in here as well. I think they're interesting guys just because of the duels that they have.
They are. I like Michael Morgan. I think somewhere in the sort of starter, anyway from the start of round 5, especially if you waited on a halfback, I think he becomes a very intriguing option with how good he looked when he did have the reins of the side, when JT got injured a couple of seasons.
Start of 5 or start of 4?
Oh, no, too early in 4. And I think the reason for that is you should get a discount sort of built into his price with how poorly he did last year. I mean, he didn't even he averaged like 47. I think you should be able to wait longer than that. If you're a big time believer, by all means, start around 4. But I think sort of round 5 onwards, he's that really good get in the halfback slot if you believe. I also think Ben Hunt becomes good value from 4 and 5. With having Norman there, and Norman being more of a distributor, Hunt should be free to do his running game, which is so good for Supercoach. So I like Morgan or Hunt sort of 4 to 5 swing. I think is pretty good.
And how do guys like Pearce, kind of what the two Knights guys fit into there? Pearce and Watson.
You can certainly wait longer on Pearce. Again, his average is not enough to sort of push people into drafting him this early. I think you could probably wait to around 6 or 7 to get Mitch Pearce. Same as it depends. There'll still be some Adam Reynolds believers out there despite the injuries. Some Moses and Bai fans. You've got a little in that sort of Pearce and Bai, Reynolds, Jerome Hughes if he is starting, which looks doubtful at the moment. Mitch Moses, that sort of level. They're all going to be there for the next couple of rounds. So unless you're a Hunter and Morgan believer, you just sit and wait a bit longer.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I think it's all well and good to say that now. I just feel like when the draft gets flowing and a few guys fly off the board, panic sets in, especially at these shallow positions like halfback, and I think it pushes those sort of guys up ever so slightly. Your Reynolds and your Pearces, all of a sudden they start standing out a lot compared to your Ash Taylors and your Mitchell Moses and your Luke Brooks and Brody Croft type of guys. I think that always pushes them up a little bit higher than you kind of expect in my experience anyway.
Just don't get pressured into drafting Matt Moylan.
Interesting call. Not a Moylan guy this year.
No, I just don't. I'm not feeling the Sharks setup. I know there might be some excitement around SJ and with Fafita in good career form and having Moylan at the back, and I don't know what it is. They lost Ramian. They've lost that little spark plug, that was Luke Lewis in terms of just random acts of brilliance. Graham will obviously be, slow to get rolling. I don't know. I just don't have a feeling about it. And I think Moylan has been chopped and changed around so much in the last couple of years. I just feel it's going to take him quite some time to get in the swing of it again. So,
sorry, mate. What worries me about the Sharks a little bit is that they just don't have an out-and-out runner in their backs. Other than, like, Dugan is there, but he's sort of out in the centres and is kind of like their sole runner. Like, SJ is a creator, but they haven't, like, I've never been a fan of Jack Whiten at fullback, but at least if he had a creator inside him, he's going to run hard and take some stopping. Whereas SJ to Moylan,
they drift.
Moylan's still going to want to distribute that ball.
Drift across field a bit.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Morris is a strong guy and has had a good career, but he's obviously towards the end. I understand your doubts a little bit with the Sharks. I think they're going to still be a good side, but they may just default back to their forward dominant game that they have in years gone by. I think so too.
Yeah. I'm not buying into Moylan now. I think he's a fine pick, sort of round 5 onwards. That's fine. He's not a guy I will grab. I could find a lot of, I'd rather take a punt on a Connor Watson, or even I think Luke Keary, as good as he's looked, the preseason. He's a guy on the rise, and again, he's in a great Roosters side. If he suddenly came out and averaged low 60s, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. He looked really good in the World Cup Challenge, Keary. So I think he's an underrated guy in Supercoach as well.
I really do. I think although he is just 5'8" only eligible, obviously 5'8" is pretty shallow, and I think he represents a pretty good value option as well, sort of in that round 5 sort of range. Again, you'll note here there's a lot of value, I think, to be had somewhere between middle of 4 and sort of end of 5 in these sort of mid to fringe top 10, 5'8", fullbacks, and even halfbacks if you include Morgan and Hunt still being there. There's not horrible options here, but I do think if you don't get on at this point, you're probably going to miss out on this tier and you're going to end up with some of those lesser top 10 guys that scare me a little bit.
This is decision time in here. This is huge decision time. Do you take one of these second row forwards that look juicy? Like we said with Gallen and Gallen, Gillette, Cohen Hess, Tarpany, Cordner, Felice Kafusi, Tohu, Clemmer. Oh, Clemmer should have been way at the top of that list, but you get my drift. Those sorts of guys are floating around in rounds 4 and 5 versus these sort of fringy guys that we're mentioning here, these sort of more skill position players. Which way do you go? Because how you go is going to impact, obviously, the rest of your draft from there on.
Yeah, not to mention, having that flexibility to grab some of the CTWs that you fancy a bit more. There are some options there that are quite juicy as well. And I'm sort of talking, anywhere from, like, if you're a Ramian or a Manu Ma'u, the Wanga Blakes, the James Roberts, if you think he'll bounce back with more tries this year, I believe he's an example of a guy I believe probably just by default will score more tries again. Rounds 4 and 5, mate. We love it. There's so many different ways to skin a cat in draft, and it gets me excited just thinking about what could be there. All I'll say a little bit of side advice here is try and give yourself options. Don't back yourself into a corner with drafts and just have locked in targets, because you've got to be able to flow with what's available to you. So if a guy drops a lot further than you're expecting, you can adapt and say, you know what, I am a big believer in Ben Hunt, and he's made it round to me in the middle of 5. I wasn't going to take him because I'm not a massive, may not be a massive fan, but Jesus, that's value, Yeah, you've got to be able to think like that.
That's right. Value is value at the end of the day. Now, I think, like what you were saying with Keary too, you've got to watch it very carefully, because in the 5'8" position, from the guys I have ranked above Keary, Milford and Cody Walker, only 2 of them are 5'8" onlys. There's a lot of guys there. SJ, Ponga, Munster, Widdop.
Well, mate, let's face it on that note. Morgan and Sean Johnson, 100%, they're played as halfbacks.
Oh, yeah. So, like, Luke Keary, even though you might have him, if you're anything like me and you do your list with with the duels in both positions, Kiri might fall down to you where he's looking like he's ranked at number. For me, I think I have him at number 10 or 11. That can trick a lot of people, because really in the wash-up, he really might be like a top 5'8" once these dual position players settle into where they're being drafted and where they're being played in their respective teams. It's real sneaky. You gotta watch it.
It is, mate. 5'8" gets shallow really fast. I think it's underrated how shallow 5'8". We've always had halfback being the struggle, but the good thing about that is there are the dual eligible guys there will most likely get played as halfbacks. I just think that's the way it tends to rub. But you've got Cleary, Cherry Evans, Hunt, Pearce, Reynolds, Taylor, Brooks, Croft, for example, all are just halfback eligible. So you can kind of, if you think you can make do with one, everyone will have a weak position in a 10-team league. And in 12 and 16-team leagues, you guys will note you're going to have probably two. Starting Ash Taylor mightn't be the worst versus getting stuck with, Jack Bird, Dylan Walker, Tamari Martin, Corey Norman in your 5'8" slot. That will realistically happen in a 10-team league. Yeah,
well, the best thing is you've got Taylor is you'll be able to find guys like Cooper Cronk and Nikorima, Lachlan Lewis on waivers for matchups when they do arise. Whereas in the 5'8" spot, it's sort of it's just not quite as enticing playing Jack Bird in your 5'8" position, for example, or Tamari Martin.
That's right, mate. So
yeah,
so I like round 4-5 is really is we've seen it many times, mate. It's a pivotal round. There are many busts in that spot, but there are the guys that really punch well above their weight. So I feel like the two RFs that are available there are going to be very, they're going to be hard to pass up, like you said, with Cohen, Hess and whatnot. But, for our strategy, for example, of grabbing one of those hookers, Coruscant, McInnes or McCulloch, that locks up a spot for a lot of people that don't have one of the top three. It kind of dictates where you're going to go.
Yeah, it takes preference over a depth position now, like second row forward. You're better off taking a McInnes and then coming back around and getting yourself like a Felice Kafusi type or a Gillett, rather than taking like a Cohen. Well, probably not Gillett. That might be a bit of a stretch. But if you are taking Cohen Hess in 4 and then coming back in 5, and then all of a sudden those hookers aren't available to you, you sort of missed the boat when you could have just dropped even only slightly in your rankings and picked up a position of need along the way. So that's the tricks of drafting, I suppose. So, man, just a couple of guys I think are interesting we haven't touched on. Paul Vaughan and David Clemmer, front row guys that are cut price investments, I guess, on your Fafita, Tapau, Sam Burgess types. Where do you see them falling?
David Clemmer, we've spoken a bit sort of pre-podcast about him, and he just looks like a rock-solid sort of 60 average guy this year. He's going to get the minutes in that Knights side. You think the Knights are going to be a decent team in terms of being on the front foot with a bit of possession this year. So he looks like a rock-solid front row number 1 to me this year that you can probably get at a decent price. Because I don't think he's a guy, especially Queenslanders won't want to draft him. There's like some built-in dislike of him. He is a super underrated real-life footballer for starters. I don't know. I'd love to have him. As a coach, I thought he'd be just amazing. There's also a chance he finally gets a crack at the try line every now and again, which at the Bulldogs, he just pretty much never got. You only add a few tries to what he's done in the last few years, and he'll average 60+. I think he's a really good, solid pickup sometime around round 5.
Yeah, look, if he's there around 5, I think you're doing well. I think he's someone we kind of peg as like an early round 4 pick that he's pretty much going to go somewhere in that range probably. If he does slip to the back of 4 and then the start of 5, that's where you're really starting to lick your lips a little bit with him there, especially being front row eligible, where we said it's just so hard to find upside in your front row. It's so easy to find guys who are going to score you between 40 to 50, but getting guys who can score you 65 plus is so hard to find in the front row. And he he's a guy that consistently gets you 65, and if he does sprinkle in a few more tries like you mentioned, then you are talking about someone who is a difference maker that you're getting back into 4, start of 5 potentially. So what about the centre wings then? Let's sort of go back to them. Last we spoke of was Croker, who you had ranked as your number 3 CTW. He's number 4 for me. I think there's a bit of a weird. It's really hard to tell where they start going off the board, just because we've said Masters is like a 3rd round pick. There's going to be a gap between Masters to Croker, and then probably another gap then. Although I say Croker and it might not be Croker in your league, as we said, that's open to conjecture. When do they start flying off the board, do you think? These top 10 CTWs, like your Fergusons, like your Manu Ma'us, Nofaluma, Mansource, those types of guys, Wonga Blake?
I think we've kind of hit the range now. Good time to bring them up. They'll start to sort of be sneaking in with these other 2RFs and these sort of mid-range hookers. So they'll, in 10-team leagues, we're sort of looking, 4, probably mid-round 4 for the Norfoluma Croker, Gutho level that you've mentioned. And then anyway, they'll just start ripping off the board between 4 and 7. I think any of the ones that could be potential CTW ones will all be going in that range.
Yeah, we'll probably start opening a can of worms in there, I'd say. I think there'll be a bit of a run, because I think most people in like the majority of leagues will target those shallower positions first, and then once one person starts taking the CTWs, they'll just start going pretty thick and fast through there. I'd say it's pretty predictable.
Just for some of our newer listeners, want to suggest that don't feel like you need to necessarily fill your squad just because you don't have a position filled. So, for example, CTW, you don't need 4 good CTWs. In fact, it kind of locks you into starting them each week rather than playing matchups. Having a good 2 to anchor your CTW with maybe a 3rd if they fall to you is good. But keep just looking for value across all the positions. So, if that fourth 2RF is still sitting there who's just a beast, and you're like, well, why is he still there? Go grab him. You'll have more trade bait with a higher end 2RF that's averaging 55 than you will a CTW that's scraping together a 50 average.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip, I think. And just to sort of bounce off that, a big tip for me is that if you are someone that gets left behind in the hooker run, I think it's really important that you just keep waiting. If you miss McInnes, McCulloch, Coruscant, who I've got ranked at number 6 at the hooker spot, let's say you are the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th people to take hookers in your league. I think by that stage, you're probably going to be the only 4 people in your league looking for a hooker. So you may as well just keep on. You've missed the boat, so you may as well just keep waiting and just take your medicine with whoever you get left with. Don't fight against each other to take what's left, and because what you're doing then is if you are taking hookers off the board, you're allowing the people who already have hookers to just continue getting guys slipped to them. You're better off just taking the value and then just taking your lumps with hooker later, because you've made your bed. You're going to have a weaker. That's your weak position now. So you kind of just got to let that lie, however it is.
And play matchups and sort of keep your eye on the waiver. You might use that as your waiver target almost, to find that the guy who just emerges, whether that's an Egan or a Kurt Mann or a Little or a Levi or a Reed Mahoney or someone like that is having the big season. They do come along, and if you could strengthen out everywhere else and find one on the way, you're going to have a good setup for the year.
That's it, mate. All right, that's probably a pretty fair rundown. I might just try and wrap things up a bit to try and go through just a couple of these guys that have had a bit of news in the off season that we just probably try and fire through a couple, just try and give our general thoughts. Just guys that have had news come their way, whether it be positive or negative. We'll kick it off with Cameron Murray. What do you think of him? What sort of round are you looking for him, and what's his outlook?
Yeah, it's the Ethan Lowe signing is concerning. Pre that, I think there was a bit of hype around him, getting that lock roll and hopefully good minutes. He's still, obviously, he's a young talent. I just I don't know, would Ethan Lowe really go to the Bunnies without promise of some minutes? And if so, that rotation then means it looks like Murray won't get enough minutes to be, anything more than more of a speculative mid-round pick. I'm probably not the guy who'll take a punt on Murray this year.
And what round do you think?
I mean, I feel like in some leagues, if you believe, you might have to go as early as like around 4 or 5 because there still is enough of that hype around. And if people don't believe in Ethan Lowe taking any minutes, someone will probably spend 4 or 5. I just think with the depth of 2RF, and I'm happy to wait till 7+ there. For mine.
Yeah, me too. I think he's a 6+er for sure. Mahe Fanua in a negative light, I think he's a guy that's got a massive red flag on him. I think he's nearly not undraftable, but he's in the nether rounds now as just a stash because it's pretty clear that Momirovski is going to get that spot. Especially,
sad. I don't like it.
You're not a fan,
mate. He's Supercoach gun. He's great for Supercoach. That fella. He probably not great for coaches in real life, but in terms of racking up the points, he would have been a really good sort of I don't know, even a week 1, but no, go on.
Yeah, look at it this way: we should be quite thankful that it's happened now and not 3 weeks into the season. So, because if he was starting and training at centre now, he'd be way up the draft board. So it's kind of a good thing in some respects there. But he's someone that you just don't want now. That especially Robert Jennings has been confirmed to be going to West Tigers. Sean Lane, dual 2RF, FRF, looks like he's going to be playing decent minutes at the Eels now. Interesting guy to target, look at.
Definitely, mate. He's been a bit of a darling of this podcast on waiver wires of the past, with especially around Origin times and whatnot. I think especially the fact that he's front row eligible. He's a good sneaky sort of later, or I guess towards the double-digit round picks that could very well end up being a really good anchor for your front row. I think he's a good target there.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I think he's a pretty good value. Top 9 front rower is for me, so I think he's a decent pick in that position. And you're not going to play him in your 2RF pretty much. He's exclusively, if you draft him, you play him in the front row. What about the stuff going on at South Sydney? Alex Johnston, Greg Inglis. Just thoughts there.
Alex Johnston's interesting as to where you draft him. I am a believer. I can say long-term listeners will suggest, a bit of a change of sort of opinion there. You and I both, we weren't convinced, but the fella has demonstrated he knows what he's doing on the sweep now, and he's developed a bit of a passing game. Yes, Bennett coming in potentially tightens things up a bit, but I feel he's legit, and I think an average, he's going to give you 50 as a bad season, but he's got that sort of 55+ in him now where he's a good player, mate. He's a good underrated player that you should be able to, put him in your fullback slot in about round sort of 5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6. I don't like it though. I'm not a huge Johnston guy.
No. He's interesting, isn't he? Like, how does he stack up towards like Dylan Edwards and Gutherson, Asako, Will Hopewade, that sort of level of fullback?
Look, he'll probably go in that kind of range on draft day, but not by me. He won't be.
Yeah,
I'd much rather those other guys personally, but I can't begrudge people from taking him there because the stats are what they are. But I feel much more confident in those other guys averaging 55+ or 50 to 55+ than I do Johnston. I think his average last year, I think that's kind of what I feel like he had a good season to get that, but that's just my thoughts on him.
He's one that I can, I'm not. He's a guy I won't be targeting, obviously, with a fullback already lined up. So you certainly, I don't think there's many options to target him in your CTW, for example. But a guy that in the fullbacks will still be sitting around, at least sort of around 6+, probably around 7 is Dylan Edwards. I love his work rate down there. As long, it's really funny. I've got Dylan Edwards ranked, relatively highly, sort of fringe top 10. Him and Will Hopewade just both present very safe sort of fullback options for me if you miss out on the elite guys, somewhere around there.
I love Edwards. I think he should go higher than that. I think he's like he's another guy that if some of these dual fullbacks that we spoke about, all of the 5'8" with Ponga, Munster, Moylan, etc., if drafts go the other way and people start picking them as 5'8s, I think Edwards really is a great guy. If you're taking a Munster, you play him at 5'8". If you see Edwards later, that's the beauty of having those dual position guys like a Widdop. If you're taking Milford, if you're taking Milford over Widdop, then you sort of lock yourself into him only being the 5'8 there, whereas you kind of I guess it's a roundabout way of saying just how valuable the dual is, just for having guys that can fall to you and give you that flexibility to move them around from position to position.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up Hopewade there. I know he's not a guy you and I typically get excited about, but that base he's been putting together the last couple of years, it's legit. And I don't really see there's that much difference between him and Dylan Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, Hopewade playing centre is a bit of a turn-off, I reckon, but I see.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it will come down a bit. It's an interesting one. Like if he was, locked into playing fullback, you'd be feeling pretty solid, wouldn't you? Because he really does seem to punch out a 55 plus in base.
Yeah, he's a good base fullback, but centre might be a bit harder to come by. I think that's when we've seen the worst of Will Hopewade at centres.
That's true.
What about a breakout guy? A breakout and a bust. I think we might try to finish off there. I'll kick it off with a guy that I think is a bit of a popular breakout, I guess, but I do kind of sip the Kool-Aid on him a bit, and that's Jesse Ramian. I really do think that there's going to be good things there from him this year. So he's someone that even with the hype, I think it's worth buying. I think he's a borderline. He's a borderline top 10 CTW this year. I just think he's a gun player in a great position to succeed. So he's a breakout for me. What about you?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, mate. Ramian's we're very excited as a Knights fan just to have him on board. I think, especially for a centre, the base should be pretty solid, and he's a bloody barnstorming player. In terms of a breakout, I'm going to go. Some might call it safe, but I do know that he's down a lot of people's rankings this year, and that's Tyrone Peachey. I believe he will be locked into that centre role, and 80 minutes with that guy in a side where, mate, he's not a guy that's got paid and is going to slack off. He wants to show what he can do. He wants to light up the league. He's great to watch, and I'm just a fan. I think he's a guy I'd love to sneak into my CTW. If I've somehow got him as a third, even a second CTW at a discount, so he's not going to cost much on draft day, I wouldn't think. I'd want to hope he's still sitting there around 8+. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think that's probably reasonable. Around 8.
I think he's a great guy to pick up down there, mate. The range of outcomes is big, but I think it's a pretty potent backline they've got there at the Titans this year, and I feel like I'm hoping Taylor can sort of keep his form longer into the season as well. I like Tyrone Roberts coming back into the fold. I just feel they may not be the best team, but I still think they're going to score a decent amount of points at home, for example. So Tyrone Peachey, good late round or mid to late round pick for me.
Yeah, I like it. So a bust, we've kind of touched on a couple of guys that you're not like overly high on, but a bust for me that I really just don't want too much to do with. I mean, I guess there's a few options, but I'm not a huge Lachlan Fitzgibbon guy for whatever reason. I just don't think just his lack of base and his reliance on tries. His team's better than it was last year, so there's no reason why he shouldn't repeat what he did last year. I just feel like the amount of tries that he got last year may be slightly unsustainable, even in a better team. I'm not loving the value on Fitzgibbon. I just don't think he can be going higher than where he is right now. I think you're probably drafting him at his peak value, so he's a bust for mine. Have you got any that you haven't said?
I've got a couple, mate. TPJ, if he's drafted anywhere from like the start of round 3, I think he's too expensive. I don't think he lives up to that level this year. That's not to say I don't think he's a gun. I just think it's a bit early for him just yet till he locks in that those minutes. I mentioned Jairo on the injury risk. I feel he gets injured again. Sean Johnson, the same. I can't have a bar of him in round 1, even though I know the average at his best can get there. It's just that's not for me. I do like. Yeah, your Fitzgibbon one holds up, mate. I'm not going to disagree with that. I wouldn't touch him in where his average from last year suggests either. I think it's very, very risky. I also think Greg Inglis's name you know he's going to go earlier than he should, and you can't have a part of that anymore, can you?
No, it's pretty. It feels like just a massive suck in. Even if he does play fullback, like it's hard to see. It's hard to see him living up to where his name will probably take him.
Yeah. Also, just with Blake Ferguson moving on, I think Daniel Tupou is a sneaky bet for a shed load of tries this year, just by default.
What happens if he moves over to the right-hand side to accommodate Morris?
I think of the two wingers that the stages of their career, I just think the ball's more likely to find him. That's my theory there. So either way.
Fair play. All right, that pretty much wraps us up for the podcast, mate. It's been good to do this again. Not really, but
it's not been. It has been an effort, listeners, but we really wanted to get a podcast out for the especially those who've been around for a long while and the newbies as well. So good luck with your seasons. Excited to get into our draft on the weekend. Let us know if you want any updates on our league settings, including the final series that we run. And also, if you do want a little recap of how our draft goes, might be of interest to people. So hit up Simon on his Twitter, which he's about to share with you.
Yeah, if I remember what it is, at NRL SC Talk Draft. I am at NRL SC Talk Draft, and there's also a draft thread up on the website NRL Supercoach Talk, so you can get it amongst the community there, which is always good to chat a bit of draft strategy and just general banter, which is good. All right, mate, appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you again, if not for a draft recap, but if not then the waiver wire.
Yeah, mate, looking forward to it. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
All right, have a good season. Catch you later.